Welcome to the College Mission Lab from Khan Lab School. I'm your host, Brennan Barnard. I'm the Director of College Counseling, and I am joined today by two special guests. First is our founder, Sal Khan. Sal is also the founder of and CEO of Khan Academy and Schoolhouse.World and Khan World School. He is the author of The One World Schoolhouse, which he published in 2012, and more recently, Brave New Words, How AI Will Revolutionize Education and Why That's a Good Thing. And he holds 3 degrees from MIT and an MBA from Harvard Business School. And our other featured guest is Dr. Olufemi Ogundele, who is the Associate Vice Chancellor and Dean of Enrollment Management at UC Berkeley. And Femi has worked as an admission leader at a number of institutions and is a researcher who studies educational systems and racial inequality. Welcome to you both.
It's great to be here.
Great to be here.
So, Femi, can you give us just a brief overview as we start of your educational journey and how you got to where you are?
Yeah, sure. So my educational journey is actually pretty interesting. I'm originally from upstate New York. I'm from the Corning, Elmira area. I went to a really small high school that actually no longer exists. That high school has been shut down since. And I went to Mansfield University of Pennsylvania for my undergraduate degree. And that school also no longer exists and has been consolidated by the state. Shortly after my time at Mansfield, I began my career in admissions. And that's when I started at Ithaca College in upstate New York. I spent a couple of years at Ithaca College. That's also where I got my master's degree. From Ithaca, I went to the University of Delaware to the Cornell University's College of Engineering. And then from there, I came out west to Stanford University, where I was at Stanford for about 4 years. And then I came to UC Berkeley, where I am now. I came in as the director originally, and then since I've gotten my doctorate degree and been promoted into this role now, where I'm overseeing admissions, financial aid, the registrar, as well as K-12 outreach with our Center for Educational Partnerships.
Thanks. Well, so you come from having a lot of different experience, a lot of different schools. So I think tonight, kind of with that lens on, we'll talk about some about UC Berkeley, but also about just kind of admission in general. Sure. And for those of you who are joining us, thanks for joining us. And we will be using the Q&A to answer all your questions. So feel free to go in and we'll get to as many as we can. Go ahead and put those in the Q&A, and we'll also have the chat. So if you want to share where you're zooming in from, we'd love to hear from you. And so Sal, maybe I'll start with you. And we have a number of topics we got through pre-registration questions and things like that. But, you know, there is a lot of information out there about college admission. And I know you were meeting with our juniors this week, Sal. And, you know, when you talk to students about kind of legitimate sources of information about college, where do you steer them?
Well, it definitely helps to talk to folks who've gone through the process. And a lot of times those could be, you know, folks a couple of years older than you. I know for myself personally, you know, I went to school, also to a high school that doesn't exist anymore, just like Olufemi. But it's
opposite of the Midas touch here. You guys,
yeah, the building exists anyway. But but you know, my school didn't have a lot of experience. You know, I remember our guidance counselor, great guy, but he had a 300-to-1 ratio. He didn't have a lot of experience with students going to out-of-state schools. And so my best source of advice really was my older sister, who had gone through the process. And honestly, that's where I got a lot. And that was pre-internet, et cetera. I think on the internet, be very careful of these message boards on any topic. I've definitely gotten in the rabbit hole on whether it's college admissions or some, you know, symptom I think I have, and then I go on a message board, I go on Reddit, and I think I'm like, you know, I might have months to live. You know, be very careful of that type of thing. If there's definitely, hopefully you have people in your community, not just students, but maybe teachers, counselors who might have that experience. But you know, one thing I want to emphasize for folks, because you might hear about people who hire like consultants and spend a lot of money, and that rich kids are doing this and that. I personally not only don't think that's an advantage, but I actually think that could sometimes almost water down your ability to show who you really are. And so what I was encouraging with these juniors, and I encourage even at KLS students even earlier, the earlier you just think about college, the better. Talk to people about it. It's, you know, if you wait until the last second, it's going to be a very stressful experience, and you're going to get writer's block when you have to write the essays and things. But, you know, this last Wednesday when I met with the seniors, I said, look, you're going to change it between the juniors. It's going to change over the next 6, 7 months before you apply. But why don't we take 20 minutes, come up with a list of schools? I'll brainstorm with you. Maybe there's some interesting schools you haven't thought about. And then after that, I said, well, think about what might be some of your top 2 or 3 choices and go take a look at their essays right now. And, just have it simmering in your subconscious. I remember in college, sometimes when I saw a hard problem set, I would just read it and think about it a little bit. Then I'd go to sleep. And then in the morning, I had the answer. And I think that can work the same way with essays and things like that. And then you also have time like, oh, wait, this is a moment where I'm challenging authority. I'm going to write about that. So yes, go straight to the source, go to people who've gone through the process, go to the actual college's sites, and yeah, and ask a lot of people questions.
Thanks. Any thoughts on that? Kind of legitimate sources of information?
Yeah, no, I think Saul brings up a lot of really great points. When I think about this, I think what's really important is to understand the difference between like authenticity and accuracy. And I think I know that a lot of folks can be skeptical sometimes about what universities might be putting out there because you're not sure if it's true or if it's spin. And oftentimes in that mistrust, folks will kind of, to Saul's point, they'll go to the internet, but the internet's got a lot there. There's the truth is there, but there's a lot of other things that are out there as well. And so, I know that students will go to YouTube or TikTok, and often it'll be a student or an alumni that swears that they're telling them the truth. And I think my issue with that is really, it's kind of twofold. I think number one, when people are telling you about the truth about the college experience could be as diverse as the students that attend that college, right? And so students are interacting with a place and they're coming from a variety of different backgrounds. And I know, like, for example, the Berkeley experience, when you speak about your Berkeley experience, it's exactly that, it's your own. And I think that while there can be some knowledge gained from the experience of others for sure, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be your experience specifically. And then I would say that the second piece is that, especially in my world, kind of in the admissions, where I know that there's a lot of folks who get online, and again, to Saul's point about, the consultants who want to give you kind of the inside scoop about applying to colleges. I'll just say this, in the last 5 years, no admission cycle has been like the last. And so that stuff can get very outdated quickly. And so I think it's important to be mindful of that. And I say all of that to say, I don't think that people are necessarily lying to you. I think that they're being authentic, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're being accurate. And so always checking kind of what you're hearing elsewhere with the actual institutions that you're interested in, I think is always a great way to kind of triangulate the information to figure out kind of what's reality and what's rhetoric out there, because there's a lot of both of that. And so I think that I'd also say the most important piece of what Saul mentioned earlier is to give the college search process more time than the application process, right? Starting sooner takes the pressure off of the learning experience about what's going on. And so it definitely allows you to let go of weak information when you're not in a pressure cooker to try to answer some questions or figure some things out. So I think all of that is really, really sound advice. And again, authentic experiences, it's always good to hear from students and to hear from the people that go there or went there, but you should always check that for accuracy based off of what's happening on that campus today.
Yeah, that's really important. And when I talk to students, I often talk about kind of going about the college admission experience as you would like be like a college student, right? Be curious, be a good researcher, go to trusted sources. So you should do it the same way. How you go about it should be the same way you are a college student, and think about it that way. So you've been at a lot of schools, Femi, and you have colleagues at a lot of schools, and there are tons of different types of schools in this country. How can students and families think about kind of going about this search with an open mind and really getting a sense for that?
It's a really great question, and what I appreciate about this question in my experience is that because I've worked at a variety of different types of institutions, I've kind of been in this position where I've had to speak to the benefits of all of these different learning environments: big school, small school, rural schools, more urban schools. And so I actually think that before you even start thinking about the college that you want to attend, you should think about some of the attributes that you are seeking, right? And so what type of learning environment do you want to be in? And I'm speaking about the location. So do you want to be in a small town, a college town, a big city? Do you want to be in a place where there's multiple universities around you? There's a lot of benefit to that. Also thinking about your academic majors. And here's what I'll say about majors really quickly is two things. One, if you are a student who has more than one academic area of interest, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think right now there's a lot of students that believe that they need to apply directly to an individual major because that's the way that they're going to get in. It's not true. No one's expecting you to know what you want to do with the rest of your life at 17. Trust me, if you put me, Saul, and Brennan on a panel when we were 17, it wouldn't look like this today, right? And so I simply say that to say, when you're thinking about academic areas of interest, be open-minded. Most institutions are going to have tons of majors you've never heard of. And what we know about education and industry is that many of the industries that young folks will be working in haven't even been created yet. I say all of that to also say that there is a difference between being undecided and uninterested. So when you're thinking about colleges, you should think about the 2 or 3 or 4 kind of academic areas that you might be interested in. And you're going to want to find colleges that have more than one of your academic interests. And I say that because it's easier to transfer majors than it is to transfer colleges, right? And so considering that, the size of a school, right? As I mentioned earlier, I went to Mansfield University. Mansfield University of Pennsylvania was about 3,000 students. And so it was a very, very small school. I came, as I mentioned, from a small town. So for me, that was a good fit. And then also the surrounding area. I always believe that the most overlooked part of the college search process is the actual community that college is located in. And people forget very quickly that you will become a part of that community. And it's not just being in the classrooms or being in the residence halls, but it's literally being in the surrounding community that you're going to become a member of. I strongly believe that students and families should sit down and do that exercise before naming a single institution, right? Before even considering costs.
Totally.
Right? Now that you have your attributes, now when you're looking for colleges, you're looking for colleges that fit you versus you trying to fit into colleges. And I think you'd be shocked at some of the schools that might end up emerging from your list. And I'll also say, do that exercise before you consider cost and always dig deeper than the price. There's constant sticker shock around that can turn folks off from institutions, but trust and believe most students are not paying the sticker price that colleges show you or that might be listed. And so the cost of an institution is where the conversation needs to begin, not where the conversation needs to end.
Thanks. Yeah. And Sal, what do you think? How do you kind of get people to escape the echo chamber? Like I think a lot of families end up kind of indexing, or students end up indexing on a small group of schools, especially in a tight community. How do you get them to kind of think beyond the borders?
Yeah, well, it's true. And we've seen it. People easily can concentrate. I mean, on a very small number of schools. I was telling the KLS students, like, I mean, and I guess there's some advantage because they're a relatively small class. I was like, there's more great universities than there are students in our class. So you guys can. I mean, of course, you can apply to the same schools. That's great, and I'm sure many will be applying to Berkeley and other similar schools. But there's also other schools that you might be the only student in the school that applies. I think I encourage. It's amazing. When I lived in Louisiana, or when I lived on the East Coast, how little people think about the West Coast. And when I'm on the West Coast now, how little people think about the East Coast. Obviously, Berkeley is always at the top of everyone's list, but there's some great schools in the East Coast. And I agree with everything Olufemi said. I take a slightly different, and there's kind of diversity of opinion here. I was encouraging the students that probably the number one thing, maybe this is what I gained from my own experience, is if you can be in an environment that really makes you a better person. And so if you are really hoping to do, great research and this and that, but you go to an environment that's not pushing you as hard, or challenging you academically, then you're not going to reach your potential. So, to a younger version of myself, I would probably, it does matter whether it's urban, small town, or whether it's big school or small school. But I've often, and obviously what majors and programs are offered, but oftentimes, like, who do you think you're going to surround yourself with it? And almost every school is going to have students that you can surround yourself with that can make you better. But you're going to find a larger number in certain places than others. But yeah, keep a broad aperture. Don't get into the just the geographic bubble that you sometimes get into. There is I try to be I try to be as both open-minded and pragmatic. I do also tell students that, look, certain schools are cheaper than others. In-state tuition in California, that's a lot of money you're going to save, especially if you're upper middle class and you're not likely to get financial aid from a private school. That can make a big difference. Sometimes if you go to a smaller school, it can be awesome. You're going to get a lot more attention, but depending on where you go, it might have less name recognition, but that might not matter as much if you're going to go grad school. But it might matter a ton if you're going to go right out of college into a job, and you're going to. So I do try to give very honest answers to this, but even with those constraints, I do find that people are narrower than they need to be in their choices.
And let me just give you a quick example of that. So when I was, it's also important to know that like colleges are good at certain things, right? So it's important that when you're thinking about the things that you're interested in, what colleges are good at what you're interested in. When I worked at Ithaca College in upstate New York, I worked at both Ithaca and I worked at Cornell. And what was really fascinating about working at Ithaca, obviously Ithaca is much more of a regional school. Cornell, the Ivy, the big kind of name recognition. But when kids would come to the Ithaca area, and Ithaca is considered a college town, and I was working at Cornell in their College of Engineering, and there were students that would come in there, and they had a joint interest in engineering and in communications. And I would ask, like, well, have you looked at Ithaca College for communications? And they're like, well, no, why would I? And I'm like, because it's a top 15 school in communications, right? And so it's important for folks to understand that that these institutions oftentimes are specifically good at specific academic areas. And if those things align with what you're looking for, that too is also important. And then the final thing that I would just say really quickly, I'm sorry, Brendan,
No, go for it. Yeah.
But the final thing that I would just say for especially for juniors and for sophomores, if you can, now's a really great time to look over the shoulders of others who are applying to colleges, specifically so you can see the supplemental questions. And this is the point that I want to make about the supplemental questions. Oftentimes in high schools, the students are being, they are workshopping and really doing their best with teachers and others on their big, long college essay. And like, that's important. However, the most important essays that are actually submitted to the college are the supplemental questions. And I'm saying this not from my experience at Berkeley, but from all the other schools that I was at that were Common App schools. And I say this because the supplemental questions are the only questions that the institution actually gets to create, right? Everything else is common, it's standard, right? And so you'd be shocked at the amount of time in the summer that we spend wordsmithing some of those questions, right? If you are a student that is applying to some of these schools and you notice that you don't like the supplemental questions, that should be a tell as to whether or not you're actually going to like it at that institution. And what I mean by that is we are creating these questions to curate the types of students that we are seeking, right? So before you think about how do I answer this question properly, you should really gauge the question. And I always talk about students interviewing the institution just as much as we're interviewing you, right? You should really gauge the question to see if you truly like that question. And that will start to help inform whether or not this fit is going to be a greater fit. Because from my perspective, the one thing that I never want to do is admit a student to my campus because they answered the questions fantastically, even though they might not have been authentic to who the student is. The student gets to my campus and then they don't like it here. And they don't like it here because they squeeze themselves into an application versus allowing themselves to shine and allowing that fit to be a little bit more natural. So definitely take a look at some of those supplemental questions because that is a tell of what these institutions are looking for. And we do change them every so often. And so it's always worth taking a look at those.
Well, and it's a tell for what they're looking for, and it's also a signal for what they value, right? I mean,
Correct.
It's one and the same, but I mean, so to that point, when you think about like the PIQs, the personal insight questions at the UC through the UC system, what are you hoping to achieve in those as you look at students' responses?
Yeah, so the UC personal insight questions, we have 8 questions, short answer questions in which students choose 4 of the 8 questions, and you can choose any 4. And so what that means is that the student shows us a lot just by which questions did you choose to answer before we even decide what the answers of the questions were, right? And so just understand how we're evaluating this. It's both a combination of like, well, what questions did this student choose? And how did the student choose to tell their story? And so the college application is exactly that. It's a series of pieces that by the time we get to the end of it, we should have a strong story or understanding of who the applicant is. So the questions that you choose will help us understand, again, the parts that you value of yourself and that you believe that you want to highlight to us. When we are looking at those questions, again, we are looking for students to be authentic about the experiences, be passionate about their academic interests. I think it is the college application is not the place to be humble. I tell people that all the time. This is the place for you to really stand up and show out and let everybody know how great you are. It's also the place for us to get a sense of like, what are you interested in, and how are you questioning an industry, the world, society, a problem, or an academic area. Those are the things that we're trying to figure out. And then also, depending on the question, what makes you who you are, right? I tell people all of the time that you are unique. I don't care how big or small your school is, you are an absolute unique individual, and we need to be able to see that. And so for you, it's an opportunity for you to really speak to the admissions officer about what makes you unique. And my advice for students on that piece when it comes to the unique point is I always talk about the drop test. And so the drop test says, if you were to drop your essays in the middle of your high school without your name on it, can people in your high school read that essay and bring it back to you? If they can't, then it's not specific enough.
Yeah. No, that's great. And Sal, I mean, you do a lot of hiring at KA and Khan Lab School and other places. How do you, when you interview candidates, I mean, it's the same kind of thing. Like, are there certain questions you ask or kind of specific to the types of things you value at the organizations where you work?
To a large degree, in hiring, a lot of the questions I've like when we've not always hired, and maybe Olufemi is also when they're tweaking the questions, they're like, oh yeah, we had some students last year and they're not happy anymore, so we have to tweak the question. So that's definitely happened in the workplace where maybe we brought on someone and they're super qualified, but they just weren't a great fit, or they didn't work out in a certain way. And so my brain, and I think our organizational brain, is always like, well, how should we modify our search process, our interview process, so we can filter on that? It's very actually similar to Olufemi saying. I've learned over the years hiring at Khan Academy that alignment with what you're trying to do is so important. You can hire the most talented. I used to say, let me just hire the smartest people I could find, the most hardest working, smartest people. Some of them worked out great. Some of them not so much, because if a smart, hardworking person wants to go there and your organization wants to go there, you're just going to be fighting the whole time. And obviously in school, you're not just trying to do one thing, but I think there's a similar thing to Olufemi's point. Like you want alignment. I saw some people on the Q&A, actually, a gentleman that I went to college with, Amit, was asking about like authenticity and can you really be who you are? And, Amit, I've seen, and I've seen, I see so many students there. Let's say they're interested in technology or STEM. They want to be an engineer. They feel that they have to write everything about all of their engineering and technical accolades. And I can imagine some of that helps. And Olufemi, I'm validate what I'm about to say or not, because maybe I'm giving the wrong advice. But I say, but like also talk about what makes you you. There was a student recently who's a very impressive student, interested in engineering, etc. And I told him, I was like, well, but how come you don't mention your podcast at all? You're on a podcast. That's so cool. He's like, well, he wasn't sure whether it mattered. I was like, no, my impression is that's going to make it really interesting for admissions folks to see this other dimension of who you are. They're thinking about the students who are going to come to their campus, and they're going to want people to run a radio and podcasts on their campus. And so that's your story. And so I've actually seen the opposite, where kids are putting themselves at a clear disadvantage by not talking about the fact that they love playing role-playing games, or not talking about the fact that they did a bunch of cold. I had a student today, I won't name any names, but he was feeling a little bit insecure that, well, it looks like a lot of other people have networks and connections. So, someone knows someone that can get him an internship here, there. And he says, I don't know anyone. And what I told him is, if you can pound the pavement and do a bunch of cold calling and get an internship that way, to me, that's 10 times more impressive than, your mom or your dad or your uncle getting you an internship. And you should make it clear that that's what you did. That's going to make you seem, and you're more likely to succeed in life, frankly, too, if you're capable of pounding the pavement and getting rejected that way. And that's what people don't realize. Like, if you can write about that type of thing, if you can write about these things that make you you, I love this drop test. I'm going to be using this a lot because that's actually the word I had trouble. I've helped review some essays for students. I'm like, yeah, it felt like the last 5 essays that I just read. And Olufemi, I'm sure you're reading tens of thousands of applications. And if they all feel the same, but if it passes the drop test, then I think you have something interesting.
No, so I could give you 1,000 amens, Saul, for all of that. I think that is it's so accurate. And even the example that you used is the quintessential, I think, fatal error that a lot of students will make. They will use their college application just as kind of almost just like a resume of accomplishments. And I'll just say this, in these highly selective environments, it is very rare for a student to stand out on accomplishments alone. I think that what people need to understand is that in the application environments that I am existing in, weak students don't apply. People see what the average GPA is of the students that come to my school. And so students with like the D's and the F's and stuff like that's not in our bell curve, right? And so it's not the academics that actually differentiate a lot of our students. And to Saul's point, I think it's important that people understand that you have to be both competitive and compelling. And the compelling pieces are often what is the difference in admissions decisions. It's not the competitive pieces. I can guarantee you that for every student that I admit, that I have denied 3 students that academically are on par with that same student, right? The amount of strong academic students versus the amount of slots that I have in my freshman class, to Saul's point earlier, like there's less slots than academically capable applicants. So when we talk about academic fit or when we talk about institutional fit, we're talking about those compelling pieces. And so, yes, I think it is critically important for students to talk about the things, the extracurricular activities that they're experiencing. I think it's critically important, not just to list them, but to talk about the ones that matter and why they matter. And same thing around academic areas of interest. I think that a lot of times folks will tell me, I'm interested in being a doctor because I want to save the world. And I'm like, well, there's many ways that you can save the world, and there's many doctors who don't, right? And so like you have to be a little bit more specific about what you're interested in. And what I will say is one thing that is always a good thing for us to know that I've appreciated at every institution that I've worked with is like the origin of some of these ideas, right? So a lot of people want to be engineers, but why they want to be engineers is always unique to them, right? What inspired them to want to get into that major, or whether it's an older sibling, a parent, playing with Legos, whatever it is, something inspired that, and that something is unique to that individual, right? And so it's those types of things that I think are helpful for us to be able to delineate some of these differences, again, because the applicant pool is academically, competitively all-stars across the board, right? And so taking some of the soft skills are really important to stand out. Yeah.
I love that. And I'd like to dial in a little on the compelling piece, because we got a lot of questions in the registration questions about like, and I saw it here in the questions here, like passion projects, right? Like, I think everybody's feeling this kind of this pressure to have a passion project or to have some research or something like that. And is that what you're talking about when you're talking about compelling? Because I think that sometimes gets miscommunicated.
I think a passion project can be an example of something that is compelling, but I don't think having a passion project necessarily equates to compelling. When we talk about compelling, and I think this is what's important, I think that people need to understand the power of narratives, right? And again, your application is a story, right? And so it's not that you did this one thing and like, oh my gosh, like that's the thing, so let's check that off, and that's the reason why we're going to admit this kid. But it's telling stories about what these things, what your experience was with these things, why these things matter to you, how you might have engaged with this, or how you committed yourself to this thing. That could be a research project, that could be a part-time job, That could be that internship that Saul was just talking about, the student going out there and finding. I think, and so it is true. We absolutely care about what you are doing on quote unquote your own time outside of the classroom, right? When your day is no longer structured, what are you doing and what do you want to do with that? When you come onto a college campus, you're only going to spend what, 15 hours a week in the classroom, right? The rest of the time, you are going to be a part of our community, clubs, organizations, all types of things. And we want to know who we're bringing in. And so I think it is important to speak to those things. But Brennan, to just draw a point on your question, it's not that we're looking for a particular experience, because not everybody has access to all experiences. But it is important for folks to tell us what are the things that you are passionate about. And again, those could be experiences, academic areas, or what are the things that you are committed to or inspired by. Those are the types of things that I think can really make a competitive application just a bit more compelling in ways, or missed opportunities that I've seen where competitive applications have come across as flat, because all they do again is just kind of regurgitate either something that I can see on the high school transcript or something that I can see on your list of activities.
And that could be taking care of your grandmother, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Or take care of an elderly neighbor or something like that. That could be what maybe you're thinking of as a passion project, right? It doesn't have to be like some kind of research or some kind of, it's just kind of digging into community and what you love and showing that though, and showing the why, I think is important.
And just to add to that, people forget. I remember when I was a kid and the TV show The Passion of Christ came on about the crucifixion. I'm like, why do they use the word passion? And then I learned that passion, the original, Latin roots, is suffering. And now we use the term because like you care about something so much that you suffer for it. And what I try to, even at Khan Academy, I tell this to myself, I won't make a video until I care about it, until I'm excited about it. Because if I'm not excited about it, the person consuming the video is not going to be excited about it. The same thing I think is true of essays. If you're not excited or feeling something, the person reading it, there's no way that they're going to feel something. And, sometimes when kids have writer's block about what they're going to write about, I try to say like, well, what was the last time you felt something in your life? What was the last time you couldn't stop laughing? When was the last time you couldn't sleep because you were so angry or you were so frustrated? When was the last time that you just thought that you were in an intractable problem? And then people say, oh, well, there's this really dumb story about my little brother and he was running around. And I'm like, you're onto something. That is interesting. Now, what did you do? And they're like, oh, can I write about that? And I'm like, that is so much more interesting than that like fifth extracurricular that you're trying to squeeze into your essay is.
I couldn't agree more. It's so true. And again, it's about, and here's what I'll say. I think that, and this is kind of the ugly part of my job, is that I think that there's this belief, right, that if you are a student that applies to Berkeley or Harvard or Yale and you don't get in, that you weren't as smart as the students who did. And I think that I just want to say this for every family member or every student that is here. Your admissions decision is not a validation or an indictment on your intelligence. That's not what it is at all. At all. I mentioned this before. There are plenty of academically qualified students that we just don't have the room for on our campus, right? This past year, we received over 150,000 applications. I'm only going to be able to, we're looking for a freshman class of about 6,600, 6,700, right? And so there's going to be a lot of great students that we're going to leave on the table, right? And so it's not that at all. And I think there's brilliance that emerges in a variety of different ways. Students whose parents have English as a second language and they find themselves in many positions where they are translating for their parents. You want to talk about passion, like that's leadership, that's responsibility. There's so many ways that you can talk about that. And so I think it's important for folks to really, Saul, I think your point about thinking about what has moved you lately is a really great way to start thinking about what are the things that you are passionate about. And to your point, it's both what has made you laugh lately, what has made you cry, what's made you scream curse words into a pillow. Those are the things that are moving you, or the things that have inspired you to dig deep into, to go and do your own personal research on something that kept you up all hours of the night or whatever. Those things are the types of things that we want to be able to cultivate, because we want you to have those experiences over and over and over again when you come onto our campuses. Because to Saul's point earlier, the whole point of going to college is to make you is to maximize your potential and your exposure for a future that we can't even imagine, right? Like that's the whole purpose.
Well, and just to take it a step further, there's a question here from Ramya, who's a school counselor, about research and kind of profile and most other profile building activities, and says it's become a huge industry with lots of players, and asking, can you please clarify that you're not expecting PhD level research and publication from every competitive applicant?
Yes, I can absolutely confirm that we are not looking for PhD level research at all, even master's levels research coming out of high school. That is absolutely unnecessary and unrequired. Now, I know that, again, some people do get really passionate about a topic, and they might be able to have the benefit of connecting with either a college student or a college professor or a teacher to be able to do some really great research. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't want anybody to think there's anything wrong with that, but it is not a requisite for entry.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And maybe you could talk a little bit, because we got a number of questions about kind of how do you then, with all those applicants, what is the criteria, and what kind of rises to the top of the criteria for what's most important? And maybe you could just talk a little bit about your kind of 13-point review at the UC system, and kind of what you're looking for and how you're looking at applicants.
And
Yeah,
I want to add to that. And if there's at all, how is it unique to Berkeley versus, say, a UCLA or other UCs or private schools?
Yeah. So for Berkeley, this is kind of how we do this. So we are looking at students. First and foremost, we're looking at your academics, right? We're an academic institution. We want to know how students are doing in the classroom. And so we're going to take a hard look at your transcript. When we take a look at your transcript, we're not just looking at your GPA, but we're looking at the entire transcript to look for academic trends. So as you move through high school, were your grades strong, or did they get stronger? As you move through high school, was your rigor strong, and did your rigor get stronger as you moved and went to your senior year? So there's a deep dive into the academic components of the application. After that, we are going to take a look at extracurricular activities. What I tell people all the time for extracurriculars, quality over quantity. We are interested in students who have engaged or who have had the opportunity to engage in extracurricular activities for multiple years, more so than we are for students who might have piled on a ton of extracurricular activities in their senior year or in their junior year. And so sustained extracurricular engagement is something that we are looking for here at Berkeley. There are 13 holistic characteristics that all of the UCs are kind of looking for and looking towards, and that's everything from leadership to notable impact to perseverance in the face of challenges to 13, again, just different characteristics that students can that we're evaluating the application on. And then we get into if there's any AP exams. So AP exams or IB scores. The University of California does not consider standardized testing the SAT or the ACT. We are test-free institutions, and so we are not looking at that at admission. But if you do have test scores, you can submit those for course placement when you actually start on our campuses. And so all of those things.
And sorry to interrupt. So just to make sure so like APs and IBs are considered, but ACT and SAT are not considered.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
At Berkeley, at the UCs.
Yeah, this is at all of the UCs. Correct.
And there's no kind of preference for AP over IB or
no AP, IB, A levels. All of those are optional. They're all optional anyway, so they're not required. They're all optional. But if students do have those, we suggest that you submit those. Again, it's a showcase of your rigor and the rigor that you've participated in, and so that is something that we are looking for. The other thing that we are looking for when students are applying, and this is specific to Berkeley, is specifically we're looking for some academic alignment. If you are a student who is interested in the STEM courses, STEM majors at our institution, we want to know how you have engaged with the STEM curriculum in your high school. And oftentimes we're looking for students, especially if you're looking for like our CS, our computer science majors, our data science majors, or our engineering majors, we're looking to see if you were able to maximize the math and the science curriculum in your high schools. And so some advice around that is if you're getting to your senior year and you're trying to decide between BC Calculus or Stats, go for calculus. If you are someone who is trying to think about your senior year and you're trying to think between AP bio or physics and you're interested in engineering, go for physics, right? And so those are the things that, and again, those are not requirements. That's just all advice on making your application, I think, as strong as it can be where you have the opportunity to do that. So all of those things are considered in the evaluation process. Every single file is read at least twice here at Berkeley. Some are read 3 to 4 times. And then when we think about selection, we are, as an institution, let me just say this, most of our students are going to come, obviously as a public flagship, most of our students are going to come from the state of California. More than 75% of our students, more than 80% of our students actually come from the state. And so it's about 19% of our students are coming from the rest of the United States and the rest of the world. And so we're always looking to do what we can around geographic diversity around our state as well. And so those are some of the things that's kind of the ways in which we go about our evaluation and application.
And I put a link in the chat there to your website for the UC website about the 13. And just to clarify, because I think there's a question here as a follow-up to your comment on the SAT and ACT, that would only be for placement after the application, after somebody was admitted. That won't be.
That's correct. Yeah. So they can use your SAT math score, for example, for math placement for freshmen, but all of that is done after the evaluation process. There's no window to any SAT scores for any of our evaluation readers.
And Femi, I think I mean, there is this kind of stress for some people around numbers of APs they take and things like that. And there was a question here in the chat about, is there a weighting of how many APs somebody takes based on how many are in their high school, or like how many they submit? Could you speak to that a little? Because I think that often is a
yeah, no, and this is another reason why I was talking earlier about like academic alignment with your APs, right? If you are, it is more important about which ones you take and how that matches what you're applying to than you taking them all, right? I'll be honest with you. What I've noticed over the last probably 3, maybe 5 or 6 years is it went from students showing up with 7 APs to students showing up with 15 to 19 APs. And when I see students with a transcript that has 15 APs on it, the only thing I feel is pity, because that was wildly unnecessary, right? And you didn't need to do that to be competitive. And so what I would say is, if you are a student, and listen, there are students who are taking the APs because those are the classes that challenge them and those are the classes that they like. There's nothing wrong with that. So I don't want people to hear me and say, you don't need to take APs, ignore APs. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that you don't need to be a part of kind of you don't need to be a part of like the arms race that is, stacking APs just for the sake of stacking APs. There's no reason for students to be fully engaged in things that are wildly outside of their academic interests just for the sake of looking competitive, right?
And there's some schools that don't have APs, right? Like we don't offer APs. Some of our students will take AP tests from the time, but we don't offer APs. And so, I mean, I think it's important for folks to know there's no expectation for schools that don't have APs that students would produce those.
That's absolutely correct. And a student that is coming from a school that does not have APs will not be evaluated as though APs were available, right? And so we always talk about maximizing the curriculum that's available to you. And so that is what we are seeking from students. And then anything above that is extra. We're seeing a lot of students also, we're seeing a proliferation of dual enrollment, especially here in California, right? So a lot of folks are taking college courses. Also, that is fantastic, and we appreciate seeing that. It is another way in which you can show academic rigor, and so there's multiple ways that you can do that. So APs is one way. Again, it's an example of, but it is not a requirement for us. There are multiple ways in which students can show engagement and rigor: AP, dual enrollment, A levels, IB exams, etc.
Thank you. All right, I'm just we're going to wrap up here in a minute because we're getting to the end of our time. We could go on about tons of different topics. We could talk all night, but I think the other piece is just kind of rigor of course program in general. Like a question that came up a lot, and I know you hear this a lot, I hear this a lot about kind of taking a more rigorous class and maybe risking getting a lower grade, or taking a more standard level class and getting a higher grade. Like what are you, how are you looking at that?
I think that that's always the question, and the answer that admissions folks will always give you is like, take the higher level class and get the A. I understand. I understand that is a true thing. I think that there's a lot to be said about the student who challenges themselves and gets that. Like I think there's a lot to be said about the B in an AP course versus the A in an honors course. And so I think that we are looking for students that challenge themselves. The AP courses and the exams, I'll also say that can I think it's important that people do take the exams. If you are able to take APs, take the actual exam so we can see that. But I think there's something to be said about attempting the rigor and really going for it. And so I strongly suggest that folks do that. The rigor alignment again is what is the best kind of tell for how you're going to perform once you get here. And so and I'll also say this, at a lot of these schools, whether it was at Stanford, whether it was at Cornell, or here at Berkeley, what I hear from students is when they maximize the rigor in their high schools, that still there is still a gap in some of the learning when it comes to some of the freshman level curriculums at some of these schools. And so I would say the best way to kind of get you ready for these quick paced curriculums, if you decide to go to like a Stanford or to UCLA, they're on the quarter system, right? Those are much smaller and shorter semesters where they're condensing information. Challenging yourself in high school is the greatest kind of prep ground for what some of that rigor could look like when you come onto our campuses.
And just to follow up on that, because I saw a couple of questions there, and this is something that we see at KLS a lot, where, as Brennan mentioned, we don't teach, we don't have a course called AP Calculus, but we have college level calculus at the school. We have college level multivariable and linear algebra and all of these things. And a lot of our students, in fact, almost all of the students, decide to take the AP test for almost for kicks.
Yep.
And some people are worried like, oh, it's not an AP course, but then they do great on the test. My impression is when students show that initiative, or even if they do an independent study and they do well on the AP exam, I think that speaks a lot about their initiative versus someone who just overloads with the nominal AP courses, but maybe doesn't take the test and do things like that. I just want to validate that point of view.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And I think there's a lot to be said, again, to your point, Saul, about taking, challenging yourself with the higher level rigor. And especially when we see students that take the exam that didn't take the test, regardless
Didn't
of
take the class.
Yeah, take the exam without taking the test, or take the exam, without taking the course, regardless of the score on the exam. The fact that the student went out of their way to self-teach at some point in time and then decide to take that exam shows an engagement in academics that is notable and worthy. And so I think that I completely agree with your point there, Saul, and I think that's a great way, again, for students to kind of show their chops without having to stack a bunch of courses on top of your already busy schedules.
Yeah.
Thanks. So as we wrap up here, I just want to ask you both a question as we kind of wind down, and that's just kind of your greatest hope for students and families as they, whether they're a junior starting this out or they're senior getting decisions back, or eighth or ninth grader, 10th grader, just kind of thinking about the future. What is your greatest hope? And maybe Sal, will start with you, and then one with Femi.
Well, I'll echo some of what Femi had said about. I think it's so tempting to attach your identity to whatever the brand of the school is, or your perceived brand. And as Buddha says, attachment is the cause of all suffering. And I've seen this year and year again at KLS and other people in my family that I've helped, or even classmates when I was, applying. If you put your best foot forward, be authentic about yourself, challenge yourself in all the ways that we've talked about, you're going to do just fine. You're going to find a path. There are students also on the other way around who go to some of the fanciest schools that, and they go there and it's not a fit and they're miserable. And I wouldn't want that for myself, for my own children or anyone else's children. I appreciate more and more in life, it's all about finding your niche, being in a good place mentally, being in a good place physically, and challenging yourself. And if you can do that, you're going to be in good shape. And I'm a big believer in, if we can, start. Sometimes there's a stereotype that if you start early, that's a little bit too much of a pressure cooker. But I think there's a way that you can actually start even as early as eighth or ninth grade. But you do it in a light way. Like, hey, this is what a college application looks like. Hey, look at these questions. What do you think? Do you have an answer? You know, um, and then by the time you're a senior year, we were just talking about how KLS is advisory, how we might want to start putting some college essays earlier in the year, so in the high school experience, so that students just think about it without pressure. And then by the time they get to junior or senior year, they're like, oh, I've been thinking about this thing the whole time. It's very natural now. So yeah, don't get attached. Get to know yourself. Think about times you felt stuff, put it in there. Have fun with the process. I know it sounds a little bit ridiculous, but you can actually have fun with this process because this is a process of introspection. It's a process where you get to write about yourself. And so if you give yourself some breathing room, it can actually be a lot of fun.
I agree. If you're not having fun, you're not doing it right.
That's right.
All right, Femi,
Right.
bring us home.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think, by the time you are done, you have selected the college that you're going to go to. My hope for you is that you have learned so much about yourself through that experience, because you have focused the attention on yourself. And I think there's a lot of what Saul just mentioned, I completely agree with. Normalizing being on a college campus and taking a college tour in 7th or 8th grade takes the pressure off when you are in 9th and 10th grade. Understanding and just doing your research, and for the families out there as well, doing your research before you're even, again, thinking about which schools. I am certain that you are surrounded by colleges in some way, shape, or form, big schools or small schools. Go and check them out. Even if you're not interested in the school, just go and check out how they're talking about themselves. What did they decide to show you? Because it allows you to think about what questions you want to ask when you are in those spaces, when you want to know every single piece of information, right? And so the more and more that you can give yourself kind of low stakes moments in this experience, the better prepared. Think about it like batting practice. The better prepared you are when it's time for the live pitches to kind of come your way. And then I would also say the last thing is that the name of the game is options. It's always, 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 always options, right? And that's options in regards to the schools that you apply to, the majors that you're interested in, the locations that you're interested in. And so I'm a strong believer in keeping those options open, and really thinking about how you could engage in different ways. And if you remember kind of what I said when we started this, which is, and this is true, right? I think the research says like 30% of industries that are going to be available to you by the time you are adults have yet to be created. It means that many of those industries might be created by people that are on this Zoom right now as we speak, right? And so at the same time that you should be ready for all of these things that colleges have to offer, we as institutions are way more excited for what you're going to bring than what we can offer to you. And so we're hoping and we're waiting for you to all be as engaged, troublemakers, change makers, all of the things, because that's really what our institutions need, and that's what our society needs as well.
I love it. I love it. Well, we will leave it there, and it really is how you go about your experience and what you do with the options you have. And so I hope people will really lean into that and like you said, make change and make trouble and do all the above. So gentlemen, I am grateful for you both for spending some time with us. We will be back next month with another college admission lab. And I put a link in the chat there to the website where past recordings are. So appreciate you all for joining us tonight, and thank you both, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.